This story will make you question everything you think you know about truth and madness. In the village of Agbon, where red dust swirled like angry spirits and whispers traveled faster than lightning, lived a 13-year-old girl named Annuli. The dust clouds rose around her bare feet as her aunt dragged her across the village square like a sack of bitter cassava. Aunt Ngozie's fingers dug into Annuli's thin arm, leaving marks that would fade slower than the shame burning in the girl's chest. "You want to disgrace me?" Aunt Ngozie's voice cracked like a whip against the mud walls. "Saying your goat talks? Are you possessed by evil spirits?" The slap came swift and sharp, spinning Annuli's head sideways. The gathered villagers pressed closer, their eyes hungry for drama like vultures circling fresh meat. Some shook their heads in false pity. Others whispered behind calloused hands. "I heard her this morning." Aunt Ngozi spat, foam flying from her lips. "Talking to that dirty goat like it was human. What will people think? That madness runs in our blood." Annuli touched her stinging cheek, wanting desperately to explain that Nkem really did speak to her. But who would believe a poor orphan girl whose parents had died under mysterious circumstances? The chief sat beneath his ceremonial umbrella, watching the spectacle unfold like a lazy cat observing struggling mice. His silence cut deeper than any blade. This man held the power to stop her humiliation with a single word, yet he remained still as carved stone. "Please, Aunt," Annuli whispered, her voice barely audible above the growing murmur of the crowd. "I wasn't doing anything wrong." But Aunt Ngozie's eyes burned with the fire of public shame. The entire village was witnessing their family's disgrace under the merciless afternoon sun. The laughter began as ripples on still water, then swelled into cruel waves. Children pointed their dirty fingers at Annuli, making bleating sounds like goats. They hopped around on hands and knees, pretending to be animals. "Annuli talks to goats," sang a gap-toothed boy, his voice high and mocking. "Maybe she thinks she's a goat too." The adults were worse with their poison-dipped whispers. "Madness runs in her blood," hissed one woman, shaking her head like she cared. Her parents were strange too, before they died. An older boy picked up a stone and hurled it at Annuli's feet. "Go marry your goat," he shouted, "since you love talking to it." More stones followed like angry rain. Each one felt like a dagger piercing her heart. Even Chief Emika's daughter Tao stood beside her father's throne, a cruel smile twisting her pretty face. The girl who had everything, beauty, wealth, status, found entertainment in watching a poor orphan suffer. The mockery echoed in Annuli's ears as she ran toward home, tears streaming down her dusty cheeks. Behind her, the laughter continued like thunder that wouldn't stop. They thought she was crazy. They thought she was cursed. But none of them knew the truth about what Nkem could really do. Nkem was different from other goats in ways that went beyond his unusual pure white coat. While other village animals were brown or black with mud-caked fur, he remained somehow clean even after playing in dirt. His gentle brown eyes held ancient wisdom that seemed older than the village itself. Annuli found him sitting beneath their favorite palm tree behind Aunt Ngozie's hut. The tree's shade felt cool and peaceful, a world away from the cruel voices in the village square. "Hello, Nkem," she whispered, settling beside him in the red earth. To anyone watching, Nkem looked like any ordinary goat. He chewed grass slowly and flicked his tail at bothering flies. But when Annuli gazed into his eyes, she saw something deeper, something that understood her pain completely. "They don't believe me," she said softly, her voice heavy with hurt. "They think I'm crazy for talking to you." Nkem's ears twitched slightly. He turned his head toward her, and for one impossible moment, Annuli could have sworn she heard him whisper, "The truth has its own time, little one." But perhaps it was only the wind rustling through palm leaves. Perhaps it was just her lonely heart desperately wanting a friend who would understand her pain. Still, as the sun painted the sky orange and purple behind the village, Annuli felt less alone than she had in years. Whatever Nkem truly was, magical or simply a very special goat, he was the only one who never judged her. That night, Annuli lay on the mud floor of her aunt's hut, staring through gaps in the thatched roof at stars that twinkled like diamonds against black velvet. Sleep refused to come as her stomach growled with hunger. Aunt Ngozi had given her only a small piece of cassava for dinner as punishment. "Maybe if you stop this foolishness with the goat, You can eat like a normal person, she had said coldly. When dreams finally came, they brought the same painful memories. Her parents' kind faces fading into shadows. The night they died with screaming and fire and whispered words about accidents and bad luck. Even as a small child, Annuli had wondered if their deaths were truly accidental. Her parents had been asking dangerous questions about missing village money. They had been too curious about why some families suddenly grew rich while others starved. The river was Annuli's sanctuary, the one place in the world where peace still lived. Clear water flowed over smooth stones while silver fish darted through the shallows like liquid lightning. She knelt by the water's edge with her clay pot, letting the cool morning wash away yesterday's pain. Behind her came the sound of footsteps on the muddy path. A boy about her age approached, barefoot like her, wearing torn clothes and dust on his dark skin. Annuli had never seen him before, which seemed impossible in a village as small as Agbon, where everyone knew everyone's business. Careful, the boy warned as Annuli leaned over the water. The rocks are slippery this morning. As if his words held magic power, Annuli's foot slipped on the wet stone. She fell forward, arms spinning wildly like a bird trying to fly. The boy lunged and caught her hand just before she tumbled into the river. "Thank you," she gasped, heart hammering in her chest. The clay pot bobbed safely in the shallow water, somehow unbroken. The boy smiled, transforming his entire face. Despite his ragged appearance, his eyes sparkled with kindness and intelligence. "What's your name?" Annuli asked, pulling her pot from the water with trembling hands. "Just call me Chike," he replied, helping her stand steady on the slippery bank. Something mysterious lived in the way he said it, as if Chike might not be his real name at all. But Annuli sensed no danger from this strange boy who had appeared like an answer to unspoken prayers. That night, sleep came easier than usual. But Annuli woke suddenly in complete darkness, her heart pounding like drums at festival time. Someone was calling her name, but the voice didn't sound human. She crept outside barefoot and found Kim standing in the moonlight beneath their palm tree. His white fur seemed to glow silver in the pale light, making him look like a spirit creature from old stories. "Annuli," the voice came again, and this time she was certain it came from Kim's direction. Her hands shook as she sat beside him in the cool grass. "Kim, did you just speak?" The goat's brown eyes met hers, filled with ancient sadness that seemed older than the village itself. When he spoke again, his voice rang clear as temple bells in the still night air. "The one who wears white during burial wears blood in secret." Ice water seemed to replace the blood in Annuli's veins. The words made no sense, yet they felt heavy with hidden meaning, like a riddle from the spirit world waiting to be solved by mortal minds. "What does that mean?" she whispered urgently. But Kim had returned to being just a goat, chewing grass as if nothing impossible had happened. Annuli ran back to the hut and found a piece of charcoal. In the dim light, she carefully wrote the mysterious words on a scrap of cloth. "The one who wears white during burial wears blood in secret." She hid the cloth beneath her sleeping mat, her mind racing with questions that had no answers. What burial? Whose blood? And why had the spirits chosen her to receive this terrible message? Outside, night birds called to each other across the darkness, their voices carrying secrets she couldn't understand. The next morning brought news that struck the village like lightning. Old Mama Kemi came running through the dusty streets, her wrapper falling loose around her shoulders as she wailed her announcement. "It was exactly 1 year ago," she cried. 1 year since Chief's son Obina was found dead in the forest. Annuli remembered that dark day clearly. The entire village had searched desperately when Obina didn't return home. They found his body near the old shrine, and the medicine man declared it punishment from angry ancestors. The case had been closed quickly. Too quickly, some people whispered when they thought no one was listening. But who would dare question the chief or the medicine man's wisdom? Now, listening to Mama Kemi retell the tragic story, Annuli thought about Kim's cryptic riddle. The one who wears white during burial wears blood in secret. At Obina's funeral, everyone had worn white, the traditional color of mourning in their culture. But what if someone who appeared innocent on the outside was hiding a terrible secret underneath? Annuli's hands trembled as she remembered more details from that sorrowful day. How Tao, the chief's daughter, had cried louder than anyone else. How she had worn the purest white wrapper. decorated with expensive coral beads that caught the sunlight. But grief could be performed like a dance, couldn't it? And what if those tears came not from sadness, but from the crushing weight of guilt? The thought seemed too terrible to believe. Yet once it entered her mind, it refused to leave. It grew like a poison plant, spreading dark roots through her thoughts. Could beautiful, privileged Tao really be hiding such an awful secret? Could the chief's own daughter know more about Obina's death than she had ever revealed? The Yam Festival was supposed to be the happiest day of the year in Agbon village. Families cooked enormous pots of food that filled the air with delicious smells. Children played games and laughed until their sides hurt. The drums beat from sunrise to sunset, making even the oldest people want to dance. But not Annuli. She sat alone at the edge of the celebration with Nkem beside her, watching the joy she was forbidden to share. Aunt Ngozi had banned her from joining the other children, claiming she would only embarrass their family again. "Look at the mad girl and her goat," someone said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Annuli tried to ignore the cruel words, but when the drumming started, her feet began moving on their own. She had always loved to dance, even when no one was watching. Music lived in her bones like warm sunlight. Soon she was spinning and swaying with Nkem prancing beside her like the perfect dance partner. For one magical moment, she forgot about everything else and let the rhythm fill her heart completely. Then came the sound she dreaded most, cruel laughter that cut through the music like a knife through silk. Tao, the chief's beautiful daughter, rose from her place of honor. She wore a mocking goat mask made of dried leaves and bark, her eyes glittering with mean pleasure. "Look, everyone," Tao called out in her melodic voice. "Here's how Annuli dances with her boyfriend." Tao made bleating sounds and hopped around on all fours, mimicking Annuli's movements with exaggerated mockery. The crowd roared with laughter that felt like stones hitting Annuli's heart. Even some adults wiped tears from their eyes, finding humor in her humiliation. "Tell your goat to predict next week's market prices," Tao shouted through her mask. Something snapped inside Annuli's chest like a dry branch. All the years of mockery, all the stones thrown in anger, all the whispered cruelties, they erupted from her soul like a volcano. "Stop it!" she screamed, jumping to her feet. "Just stop." Tao removed her goat mask, revealing a face twisted with malicious pleasure. "Oh," the mad girl found her voice. "What's wrong? Your goat didn't like my performance." "I'm not mad," Annuli said, her voice shaking with hurt and rage. "I'm just different, and you have no right to be cruel." The village square fell silent as death. Children stopped playing their games. Adults stopped their conversations. Even the drummers lowered their sticks, sensing the shift in the air. Tao's face darkened with fury. How dare this poor, crazy orphan girl speak back to the chief's daughter? The slap came so hard that Annuli spun completely around like a dancing leaf. She stumbled backward and fell into a large calabash full of palm wine that had been saved for the village elders. The sweet wine soaked through her only good dress as the empty calabash rolled across the ground with a hollow, mournful sound. The crowd erupted in cruel laughter once again. Even some of the respected elders were chuckling behind their weathered hands, finding entertainment in a child's pain. Annuli lay in the puddle of palm wine, her face burning with shame and the sting of Tao's slap. Through her tears and the taste of wine in her mouth, she heard Nkem's voice as clear as thunder rolling across the sky. "She who mocks beside fire will one day burn her own roof." The words seemed to echo in the sudden silence that followed. Annuli looked around wildly, wondering if everyone had heard the impossible voice, or if it existed only in her imagination. But Chaik was there at the edge of the crowd, his eyes wide with shock. He pushed through the laughing people and knelt beside her in the sticky puddle of wine. "Wait," he whispered, his voice trembling like leaves in wind. "Did your goat just speak?" Annuli's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst. Someone else had heard it. She wasn't losing her mind after all. Tao still stood above them, but her mocking smile had faded into something that looked almost like fear. She appeared confused and frightened, as if she too had heard something that shouldn't exist. "What did you say?" Tao demanded, looking from Annuli to the goat with growing alarm. But Nkem was just a goat again, calmly licking palm wine from his white fur. The crowd continued laughing, but some people were looking uncertain now, sensing something strange in the air. Chike helped Annuli to her feet with gentle hands. "We need to talk," he whispered in her ear. Privately, as they walked away from the festival, Annuli could feel hundreds of eyes following them like hunting birds. The laughter was dying down, replaced by confused murmurs and worried whispers. Something had changed in that moment when Kim spoke. Something that would never be the same again. Later that night, when the village slept peacefully under star-filled skies, Chike met Annuli beneath their special palm tree. His face looked serious in the silver moonlight, older than his years. "I need to tell you something important," he said carefully. "I'm not just a wandering boy looking for work. I'm learning to be a healer from the old medicine woman in the next village." Annuli's eyes widened with new understanding. Medicine people knew about things that ordinary villagers couldn't comprehend. "And I think," Chike continued, choosing his words like precious gems, "that your goat is not just an animal. I think he might be a vessel, a messenger from the spirit world." The words sent chills racing down Annuli's spine like cold water. A vessel. Sometimes the ancestors choose unexpected ways to speak to the living, Chike explained patiently. They might use dreams or signs in nature, or... He looked at Nkem, who was listening with his intelligent brown eyes. Or through an animal that appears ordinary but carries divine wisdom. Annuli thought about all the times she had felt like Nkem understood her better than any human being. All the moments when his eyes seemed to hold secrets older than the village itself. "If that's true," she whispered, "then what he said about blood and white clothes might be more than just words," Chike finished. "It might be a message about something important, something dangerous that needs to be revealed." They both looked at Nkem, who continued chewing grass as if he held no mysteries at all. But the air around them seemed charged with possibility and danger. The forest around Agbon village was thick with ancient trees and shadows that moved even when no wind stirred the leaves. Annuli usually avoided the deep woods, but today she was gathering herbs for her aunt's cooking. The familiar task helped calm her racing thoughts. The sound started soft and strange, drums beating in a rhythm she had never heard before. But as she moved deeper into the trees, the drumming grew louder and more urgent, like a heartbeat speeding up with fear. Then she saw it through the tangled branches, a figure in a dark mask dancing between the trees. The mask was carved to look like a skull, with empty eye holes that seemed to stare right through her soul. Annuli's blood turned to ice in her veins. She had heard stories of evil spirits that haunted the forest, but she had never believed them until now. The masked figure turned toward her and began moving closer, its feet pounding on the forest floor in time with the wild drumming. Annuli turned and ran, crashing through branches and jumping over fallen logs like a hunted animal. Behind her, she could hear the figure pursuing, its breathing harsh and frightening in the growing darkness. Just when she thought she would be caught, Kim appeared from nowhere. The white goat charged straight at the masked figure, his head down like a warrior charging into battle. The collision sent the figure stumbling backward with a cry of surprise. Something small and bright fell from its costume and rolled across the dead leaves with a soft tinkling sound. The masked figure scrambled to its feet and disappeared into the thick trees, leaving only the echo of drums fading in the distance like a bad dream. Chike found them an hour later, sitting by the stream while Annuli tried to calm her shaking hands. Nkem grazed peacefully nearby, as if nothing unusual had happened at all. "What's this?" Chike asked, holding up the small object Annuli had retrieved from the forest floor. "Wearing that mask has connections to the chief's family. But why would someone from the chief's household be dancing in the forest like an evil spirit?" They both looked at Nkem, hoping for another mysterious message from the spirit world. But the goat just flicked his tail and continued eating grass as if he held no secrets. Still, Annuli carefully wrapped the bead in a piece of cloth. Something deep inside told her it would be important later, when all the pieces of this puzzle finally came together. The forest around them seemed to whisper with secrets they couldn't yet understand, but the truth was getting closer. That night, the moon was dark and the village slept deeply under a blanket of peaceful silence. But beneath their special palm tree, Nkem's voice cut through the quiet air like a sharp knife. "The chief's daughter knows what killed Obina." This time, Chike was ready for the impossible. He had brought a small recording device that his medicine woman teacher had given him, a gift from a traveler from the distant city. The tiny machine captured every word in Kim's clear, otherworldly voice that seemed to come from ancient times. Annuli felt like her heart might stop beating entirely. Tao knows what killed her own brother. But Kim had fallen silent again, leaving them with more questions than answers swirling in their minds like autumn leaves. Chaik played back the recording with trembling fingers. The voice was definitely there, definitely real. No one could say they were imagining things now. "We have proof," he whispered urgently. "Proof that your goat really can speak." But they also had something far more dangerous. Proof that the chief's family was hiding a terrible secret about Obina's mysterious death. "What do we do now?" Annuli asked, fear and excitement battling in her chest. Chaik looked at the small device in his hands like it held fire. "We find out what really happened to Obina. And we should be very, very careful." The palm tree rustled above them, its leaves whispering warnings in the night wind that carried the scent of approaching storms. Around them, the village slept on peacefully, unaware that everything was about to change forever. The next day, Annuli and Chaik decided to be brave enough to seek the truth directly. They found Tao by the river, washing clothes with some of the other young women from wealthy families. Tao looked up suspiciously as they approached, her pretty face darkening with remembered anger. She had not forgotten the embarrassment at the festival or the strange moment when the goat seemed to speak impossible words. "What do you want?" she asked coldly, her voice like winter wind. Annuli's heart hammered in her chest like festival drums, but she forced herself to speak despite her fear. "We want to talk to you about your brother," she said as steadily as she could manage. The other girls stopped their washing and stared with wide eyes. Everyone knew that Obina's death was not discussed openly in the village. Tao's face went pale as moonlight, then flushed red with anger. "How dare you mention my brother? What could a mad girl and a stranger possibly know about anything important?" Chaik stepped forward calmly, his voice gentle but firm. "We know more than you think." "Like what?" Tao challenged, but her voice was shaking now like leaves in a storm. "Like the fact that someone in your family knows more about how Obina died than they've told anyone," Annuli said, her courage growing stronger with each word. The other girls gasped and started whispering to each other excitedly. This was bigger gossip than anything they had heard in months. Tao stood up so quickly that she knocked over her basin of soapy water. "You think people will believe lies from a goat and a mad girl?" she spat. "You're even crazier than I thought." But as she stormed away in anger, Annuli noticed something very important. Despite her harsh words, Tao was absolutely terrified. When Annuli returned to her aunt's hut that evening, she smelled smoke before she saw the orange flames dancing against the darkening sky. The little structure was burning like a torch in the wind. Everything she owned, her few clothes, her sleeping mat, the precious cloth where she had written Kim's first message, all of it was turning to gray ash that floated away on the night breeze. Neighbors stood around watching the destruction, but no one tried to put out the fire. It was already too late to save anything from the hungry flames. "Where were you?" Aunt Ngozi screamed when she saw Annuli approaching. "Where were you when our home burned down?" But Annuli knew this was no accident caused by cooking fires or lightning. As the flames died down and the crowd began to scatter, she heard a voice whisper from the darkness behind her. "Leave this village or die like your parents." The voice was disguised and muffled, but she recognized something familiar in its tone. Someone she knew was threatening her life with words as cold as winter water. Chaik appeared beside her as she stared at the smoking ruins of her shelter. "We're getting close to something dangerous," he said quietly. "Someone is scared enough to try to drive you away. Or worse," Annuli whispered, remembering the masked figure in the forest and thinking of her parents' mysterious deaths. The village elders sat in a circle under the ancient baobab tree, their weathered faces serious and skeptical. Chaik had requested this emergency meeting, claiming he had important evidence about Obina's death that could not be ignored. The chief sat at the center of their circle, his elaborate robes and golden staff marking his supreme authority. His eyes were cold as winter stones as he looked at Annuli and Chaik. "You dare to waste our valuable time with the wild ravings of a mad girl?" Elder Okoro asked irritably, his patience already worn thin. Chaik held up his recording device with steady hands. "Listen to this carefully, and then decide if we're wasting your time." He pressed the button. Nkem's voice filled the air, clear and unmistakable as mountain water. The chief's daughter knows what killed Obina. The silence that followed was thick as honey and twice as heavy. Then Elder Emeka started laughing like this was the funniest joke he had ever heard. A talking goat. This is what you bring to us. Soon all the elders were laughing, slapping their knees and wiping tears from their eyes as if they had heard the most ridiculous story ever told. What next? Elder Okoro gasped between fits of laughter. Talking chickens? Dancing trees? Maybe the rocks will start singing songs, another elder chuckled. The chief was not laughing, though. He stared at the recording device with a strange expression that mixed fear with growing anger. This meeting is over, he declared, standing up abruptly. Stop wasting our time with this foolish nonsense. But as the elders dispersed, still chuckling and shaking their heads, Anuli noticed that several of them looked troubled despite their laughter. 3 days later, everything changed in ways no one could have predicted. Anuli was in the market square with Nkem when the goat suddenly lifted his head and spoke loud enough for everyone nearby to hear clearly. Your son died not in the forest, but in the river, after a struggle. The chief had been walking past at that very moment, close enough to hear every impossible word. His face went white as bone bleached by the sun. His golden staff slipped from his trembling fingers and clattered on the hard ground. His eyes rolled back in his head, and he collapsed like a great tree falling. The chief is dying, someone screamed in panic. People came running from every direction like ants from a disturbed hill. The medicine man was called urgently. Water was thrown on the chief's pale face. But when he finally opened his eyes, the first word that came from his lips was Obina. The crowd fell completely silent. Everyone had heard what the goat said. Everyone had seen the chief's shocking reaction. For the first time in anyone's memory, people began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, the mad girl's goat was telling the absolute truth. The river, the chief whispered as they helped him sit up. He said the river. But Obina's body had been found in the forest, far from any flowing water. Unless someone had moved it after he died. By evening, the whole village was buzzing with whispers and wild theories. The story spread like wildfire from house to house, growing larger with each telling. Did you hear what the goat said? The chief fainted right there in the square. Maybe that girl isn't as mad as we all thought. But the whispers brought something unexpected. People began coming to Anuli with their own secrets, as if Nkem's truthful words had unlocked something hidden in their hearts. Old man Adamu confessed that he had been stealing from the shrine offerings for months. Mama Okoye admitted she had been cheating her brother out of his rightful share of their father's land. Young Emeka revealed that he had been the one stealing corn from his neighbor's farm. It was as if the goat's impossible honesty was spreading through the village like a good disease that cleaned out lies and guilt from people's souls. The village split down the middle like a cracked calabash bowl. Half the people began to believe that Anuli had been chosen by the ancestors to reveal hidden truths. They brought her food and offered her shelter, treating her with newfound respect. But the other half grew more convinced that she was a dangerous witch who threatened their peaceful community with evil magic. She's bringing evil spirits into our village, some people whispered fearfully. That goat is possessed by demons, others claimed with absolute certainty. Fights broke out in the busy market. Families stopped speaking to each other over their disagreements. Children were forbidden to play together if their parents disagreed about Anuli. And through it all, Tao was nowhere to be seen. The chief's daughter had disappeared from the village 3 days ago, right after her father collapsed in the square from shock. She went to visit relatives in the next village, the chief claimed when people asked. But his eyes were haunted like a man who had seen ghosts, and his hands shook when he spoke. Behind the old shrine, where the forest grew thick and wild, Chike's sharp eyes spotted something white buried under a pile of dead leaves. Look at this, he called to Anuli urgently. Together, they carefully dug up a bundle wrapped in banana leaves. Inside was a white cloth wrapper, the kind women wore to funerals and important ceremonies. But this wrapper was stained with something dark that had turned brown with age and weather. Blood, Anuli whispered, her hands trembling like leaves in wind. Chike held up the cloth and examined it carefully in the dappled sunlight. The pattern was distinctive, expensive white fabric with gold threads and coral beads sewn along the edges. I remember this, Anuli said suddenly. Tao was wearing a wrapper just like this at Obina's funeral. She looked so beautiful and sad, crying harder than anyone else. But if this is the same wrapper, and it has blood on it. Chike's voice trailed off. They both understood what this terrible discovery meant. The burial cloth with blood stains, exactly what Kim had predicted in his first mysterious message. The one who wears white during burial wears blood in secret, Annuli recited. Now they had physical proof to go with the goat's impossible words. But proof of what exactly? And how dangerous would it be to reveal what they had found? The full moon hung like a silver plate in the clear night sky when the village elders called for an emergency council meeting. The entire village gathered in the square, men, women, children, everyone who could walk. Torches burned bright against the darkness, casting dancing shadows on worried faces. In the hushed silence of the gathered crowd, the white goat lifted his head and spoke with a voice that seemed to come from the very earth itself. The daughter of the chief, out of jealousy, pushed Obina into the river. Gasps rippled through the crowd like waves on disturbed water. Someone screamed. Children began to cry, standing before the entire village, with hundreds of angry eyes upon her. Tao finally broke under the weight of her terrible secret. "I didn't mean to kill him," she sobbed. "It was an accident." Through her tears, she told the whole story. Jealous that Obina would inherit everything simply because he was male, she had confronted him by the river. The argument turned violent. She pushed him. He fell, struck his head on rocks, and drowned. "I moved his body to the forest," she whispered. "I thought no one would ever know." The chief fell to his knees in the red dirt, his golden robes pooling around him. "Forgive me," he said to Annuli. "Forgive us all." 1 year later, Annuli walked through the village square where her journey had begun. Children ran to greet her with respect instead of stones. She lived now in a beautiful house the village had built, honored as the voice of justice. The truth, no matter how impossible it seemed, had found its way to the light.